we'll be having James join us soon. We start with the verse of the Quran, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Qala law anna li bikum quwwa aw awi ila rukunin shadid. So this is Prophet Lut alayhi salam when he's talking to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when he's confronted by the people. He says, if only I had against you some power, or could take a refuge in Rukn and Shadid, which is strong support, which is what strong support is built on. I get a lot of questions where does the strong support come from? So I thought I'd chip in. In terms of what is on offer, we're a not-for-profit organization, and as such, what we've built for the Muslim community is a safe space where Muslims with unwanted same-sex lust or kind of gender confusion can come in and get the support they need. So we have a free consultation service, which, mashallah, about 200 people have access so far. We have weekly support groups for men and women. We also offer one-to-one coaching at that one-to-one level, which again, some of you are benefiting from. And as such, today we offer this webinar. This webinar is almost as an educational piece for the rest of the Muslim Ummah to better understand this populace and the needs of this populace. And as I say, it's free, it's open to everyone, open to all faiths, open to anyone who's interested in this topic. We are completely reliant on donations, on just to kind of know everything which, so from the coaching or anything that the payment goes back into strong support. So it's a not-for-profit, like a social enterprise, inshallah. Hopefully we'd be joined by James soon. Just to give a little bit of a introduction to James's story. Oh, I just said James and here he is. Hi, James, how are you?
Hi, dear brother. My apologies for being late.
No, it's okay. You were right on time. I was just about to introduce yourself. I got contact with James, I think one or 2 months ago, towards the end of 2020, and as most of you probably hear, you've seen him in terms of his story, and hopefully we can go a bit. We can touch on that this session. And I was thinking, okay, how do I term this? Because one of the things we just had the verse of Lut alayhi salam, where he's calling the people not necessarily to what people think we're doing, heterosexuality. He's calling people to God-Centricity, or what we call taqwa. And I think that's really important when we're seeing these experiences and these stories that people are sharing, how God is having that central effect in their line. And I really like what James put is his work is involved in the godly restoration of people, So, and that's something we can all share and we can all experience in our lives as so on. I know James at the moment leads True Identity International, but I know for those of you who've been with this community for a while, you can recognize him maybe from London when in the men's groups in London that he leaded. And I would say 20 years. I think this significant. I was going through and I was saying, okay, so many, there was Harvesters Men's Network, there was so many different bodies and so many different lives, affected. So we're very pleased to kind of have him here, and yeah. I'm going to give the lead to James. So James, thank you for joining us today. I know it's, as you can see, it's early here, but it's probably 8 p.m. or so in Australia.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
How, and I know that, I guess we'll start with the what kind of brought us together in terms of what's currently happening in Australia. And the more I read about it in the news, the more it's kind of crazy and frightening. And I'm like, is this actually happening? And we already know that there was efforts done by, I think, Free to Change in the Victoria district. And unfortunately, it didn't go ahead. And now what we're discussing is the ACT, is that right?
That's right. Australian Capital Territory.
Yes. So could you start a little bit about what you've perhaps been doing on that front?
Yes, certainly. I mean, what's happened is there is a global push at this time in history to not just to legitimize same-sex or homosexual behavior and also transgenderism itself. It's not just about legitimizing it, it is about, and it's also about normalizing it. But in somewhere there's a big push to superiorize it, to make it something that is almost superior to heterosexuality. So it's not just that we're seeing the odd nation turning around and pushing these laws against any form of therapeutic help or any form of spiritual help in relation to same-sex attraction, but we're seeing this across the leading Western nations of the world. Because once they are transformed in some way or other into this ideological understanding of things, then what happens is these big nations that are often very rich nations and therefore provide foreign aid and funding for others who are more vulnerable, they then demand that these other smaller nations, younger nations, whatever they are, but more vulnerable nations, that they also take on board this overtly left-wing and really quite communist ideology. What's happened here in Australia, we're very different to the UK, in the sense in the UK, we have one parliament, and therefore when a law is passed, it is passed for the nation itself, unless of course you're in one of the areas like Scotland or Wales or England, and you've got the Scottish Parliament and you've got the Welsh Assembly, etc. Here in Australia, we have 6 states and we have 2 territories. And what's happened is this is to smaller, easier, I dare say a little bit more vulnerable areas, they have deliberately pushed these laws. So Queensland is a very large area on the east of Australia, not a very big population whatsoever. And the reason why such a law to ban therapy and to ban any form of prayer whatsoever relating to anything non-heterosexual. So it's not just about same-sex attraction, it's about anything non-heterosexual. The reason why they began really with that particular region of Australia is because it only has one chamber in Parliament. You know, in the UK, we have the House of Lords as the upper house, we have the House of Parliament or the House of Commons as the lower chamber, and it's got to pass both chambers, the upper and lower house, for a law to be passed. Well, in Queensland, it doesn't need to do that. It's just got to pass the one chamber it has. So, of course, if LGBT lobbyists and others can sufficiently persuade enough people that any form of therapy or anything that begins to challenge same-sex attraction, and you know the lie that has been promulgated that people are born this way and that change is not possible, if they're able to actually capture the minds and the consciences of politicians there, then the law will pass. And that's exactly what happened. Now, in Queensland, the fines and the prison sentences were relatively low. I mean, they're still horrific. They're still more than if you've murdered somebody, you know, that you decided to pray with somebody about their sexuality. But then what happened is that law was passed in Queensland. Then it moved to the Australian Capital Territory. Now, the Australian Capital Territory contains, I don't even think it's hundreds of thousands of people. It might even be tens of thousands of people. It's a tiny, tiny area. It's Canberra, the capital city of Australia, and a few other suburbs around it as well. And what happens is they have something called a chief minister, who's a bit like the Prime Minister of the Australian Capital Territory. And it's important you have an understanding of how this is progressing, really, deliberately progressing to try and take over a nation. Because a very similar thing will seek to happen in the UK. What happened in the Australian Capital Territory is the Prime Minister there, or what's called the Chief Minister, is an openly gay man, and he has married, or what I call miraged, his partner, his male partner. And what they're coming out with, the health minister, what the chief minister's coming out with is saying, nobody's broken, you don't need any help. Anybody who tells you need help, you know, they are the bigots, they're hate-filled, they're intolerant, they're misunderstanding. All of the vocabulary and wording that we've all heard ourselves. So they've pushed a law, but in pushing their law, they've also said that it's not just if anybody prays with somebody, offers therapy around sexuality, and offers prayer or therapy around sexuality away from homosexuality or away from transgenderism. If you offer therapy towards homosexuality and transgenderism, that's fine. But the other way back, if anybody does that, they would have greater fines and a greater prison sentence. But not just that. They've also said that if anybody tries to help anybody to leave that territory and to get help, they too could be open to being fined and or imprisoned. So you could be fined and imprisoned for just trying to help somebody to leave this area. Now, let me say this. The ACT is probably the same size as Greater London. Now, Greater London, it's a pretty big area, Greater London, you know? So it's not a big area. It's not a lot of people. So if you're there in London and you can't leave London to go outside and visit a therapist or a clinician of types, imagine how imprisoned that would make people feel. And that's the law they passed.
Yeah.
So Queensland and ACT have both passed these laws. Now Victoria is looking at passing these laws. The thing about Victoria is that it's looking at fining people around £115,000 and up to 10 years imprisonment, or possibly both, for seeking to offer somebody therapy or any form of prayer whatsoever in this area. And the premier, or if you like, the mini prime minister of that state, of that area here in Australia, he's made the same ruling as well. Say if anybody leaves the state for help or looks beyond the state for help, they too can be penalised. So basically, I run accountability groups for different people with same-sex attraction. People in Western Australia link up with people in Victoria. They link up with people in Queensland. And I might give a teaching every couple of weeks to help people understand same-sex attraction, the root causes, and what they need to move beyond this. So I am now open to being fined up to £115,000, which is $200,000 Australian dollars, and to be imprisoned for 10 years for even beginning to seek to offer help to people. Now, why should we be concerned about this? Well, I think it's pretty obvious, is that it's trying to instill fear into our lives. Now, as if our lives haven't been instilled with enough fear by the fact that we've grown up and experienced same-sex attraction and felt ourselves separate and different to everybody else in society. That's one thing. But I ask you to reflect on this very carefully. The lesbian and gay and LGBT lobbyists who are pushing for these changes in law, they've reflected very carefully on our journeys, and they know that therapy makes a difference. And they also know, and this is what's most important, they know that prayer and a surrender before God, and that God-centricity, taqwa, makes all the difference. They know it. They know that if we're serious about this, that actually change begins to happen. We have a sharpened conscience and our soul begins to rise before God, and we recognize that we are not the center of our universe. And therefore, we have to humble ourselves before God and to worship Him and to worship Him alone. That we can't worship ourselves. So the opposite of gay pride, of course, is really a God-centered humility, a recognition that we aren't made by ourselves, that we're made by there's one greater than us. There's an omnipotent, omniscient, all-knowing one who is all merciful, and that therefore we are to lay our lives down before Him. So at the moment, we are in that tender place of Victoria, the state of Victoria here in Australia, which is one of the most populated states of all. There's not that many people in Australia. We're a big country, 23, 24 million people. But that state is now pushing those laws. If you heard Leah speak before on strong support, then you'll know that Leah is from Victoria. We've been doing a lot of partnership work together there as well. But these are what we call draconian laws. These are some of the most shocking laws imaginable that have ever come across our nation. We thought the laws that Canada was pushing were bad enough. But here in Australia, particularly in Victoria, there is a total rejection of anything to do with God. And I'll come to the Muslim aspect of this in a second. There's a total rejection of anything to do with God, but they are willing to portray themselves as those who are friends of God, and particularly of the Muslim community. But I'm really pleased to say that the Muslim community is beginning to wake up to the fact that the Premier or the mini Prime Minister of Victoria, if you like, he's thrown lots and lots of money at the Muslim community. But deep, deep down, he's trying to undermine any faith, and particularly any faith in a monotheistic God. But he's also trying to undermine the family and also the authority of parents as well. And this is very much the heart and the messaging and the goal of communism itself. If you read the communist goals of 1963, you will see that they want to totally and utterly annihilate any understanding of God. They want to get rid of conscience for people to be able to live their own lives and to make their own decisions. And they particularly want to undermine the family through sexualizing everybody, which they know will bring about confusion and a sense of shame. But also what it will do, it will mean that people will become dependent on the state, and therefore the governments can have all the power they want. They can then try and be God. Now, Ali, I'm talking a lot there, my friend. I hope I'm still on the right. I hope I'm still answering your question, and that people haven't already signed off about this.
No, absolutely. We've still got people, and no, it's alarming, isn't it? And I think what you said about it's written in law. So it's written, the law writes, if you're moving away from trying to get people away from a certain type of sexuality, isn't it? I mean, if it was, I don't know, 50, 60 years ago, and the law was saying you're trying to move them away from heterosexuality, that would be wrong as well, because
absolutely
you're saying that you don't let the individual have the decision of where they want to go, you know. So
that's right.
If I'm in if I identify as LGBT, and then true to my own conviction or true to something that's changed in my life, I then decide, actually, I want to explore my sexuality in a different light, you know. So they have this rainbow flag, isn't it, which is supposed to be all encompassing. It's supposed to say, okay, I can be any different strand of sexuality, but it's almost seeming like if someone wants to explore heterosexuality, or, you know, kind of move towards that, then that's considered discriminatory, or it's considered bad, but
intolerant and hate-filled and unequal and everything else. That's right.
Yeah.
And this is where it's really important for us, because you see, I'm very conscious for those here listening today as I speak, that, you know, you've had a very challenging and fragile journey. already.
Mm.
And the fact of the matter is this is none of us have chosen to experience same-sex attraction. We have already begun to experience pain. We know that somewhere deep down, we're not living the true understanding of masculinity or femininity as we should be living. We know that. And our faith journey has permitted us to keep our conscience sharp all the time because we're willing to acknowledge that there is one who is greater than we could ever be. Now, the thing is, we've already been brought to a place of fear and imprisonment. And we know that God is all good. And because God is all good, and we even have the word good, it means there's something that's all bad. And so what we have to recognize is that which is all bad will portray itself as all good. The devil will do this to us and will tell us that somehow or other, the way we think is wrong and that our feelings are right and correct. Now, where I think that we are in a very blessed situation, a very fortunate situation today is this. Years ago, people would have hated themselves because of their same-sex attraction. We're in a position today to understand that our same-sex attraction is not how we've been born. It's also not our fault. And that actually much of our same-sex attraction, if not all of it, is rooted in legitimate needs. Some of you I know have heard this before because we've been in groups who've talked about this before. I have a legitimate need to step into the world of men and to know who I am as a man. I've got a legitimate need to do that. The problem is this, is that homosexuality invites us, first of all, to take on a worldly label, not an eternal label of who we are and who God or Allah has made us to be. And what happens is we're also not just asked to take on a worldly label, but we're expected to believe that our feelings mean everything. No, our feelings aren't wrong. They just tell us where we are, but they're also able to instruct us about where we have gone wrong. And also therefore where we need to be able to reflect and to humble ourselves and to be God-centered in such a way that we can find out what needs to become a legitimate way to meet our legitimate needs. And that's much of the work that I'm involved with here in Australia. So for example, I have two young men in their 20s who share a home here with me. And so we are constantly in the community situation here in which I'm able to live and we're able to live, is we're addressing all the time when temptations come their way, that we say, okay, let's look at these temptations. What is it that you are yearning for? And on the surface, it may be, I just want to hook up with a guy, or I'm attracted to this man, etc. We say, okay, what does this guy symbolize to you? What does he mean to you? What is it that you think he has that you don't have? Or what do you think you will gain from some form of connection with him? And what do you want that connection to look like? And we've come to a realization, of course, that for the most part, it's a heart-to-heart connection. It's a being known. It's being affirmed. It's being found to be pleasing. Some of you, I'm sure, will have heard that which Joseph Nicolosi often talked about, the late Dr. Joseph Nicolosi, and I think now his son, the present Dr. Joe Nicolosi. The 3 A's is the attention, the affirmation, and the affection. And when we have these in a sufficient quantity, we have a sense of self-acceptance rather than self-hatred and self-rejection. So these couple of guys with whom I live, and then with others who are part of a wider support group here in Australia, well, in my own state of Western Australia, but then further afield as well. All the time, we're seeking to begin to look beneath the surface and to say, what do we legitimately need? And where also did we go wrong? Where did our fathers not affirm us? Where did we not feel that we were one with our peers, for men with other men, or teenagers with other teenage males, and for teenage females with other teenage females? And we begin to address some of these areas. And we're seeing, of course, that that people don't get healed of homosexuality But what does happen, and certainly what happened in my own life, is that there were different layers and different issues within my life that had layered on top of each other over a series of, from my childhood through teenage years to adulthood. And once I found a sense of once I was able to identify where the issues were, the pain was, the difficulties were, when I was able to offer forgiveness to those who'd hurt me, where I was able to ask forgiveness from God, from Allah himself, for what I'd done wrong, and where I was able to release forgiveness to myself, then what happened is I began to find an element of freedom where there'd previously been an imprisoning issue. So where I was in prison, I was suddenly finding freedom. And when I found freedom on these different layers, slowly but surely what happened is, rather than living out of the brokenness and the pain of my past, I was able to go back and to actually be reconciled with all these different layers and aspects of my life, to the point that, unbeknown to me, the true heterosexual me then began to rise. Does that mean I never experienced same-sex attraction? No, it doesn't mean that. Yes, I do. I mean, for years and years and years, the neural paths, the pathways in my brain have learned to be shaped in that way. So there's times today when I still feel that. The difference is this: if I do feel same-sex attraction, or I begin to compare myself with another guy, or I feel in competition with him, I know what it is to step back, to look beneath the surface and to say, why do I think he's better than me? What's happening here? Where do I think my own masculine tank, the sense of my own masculine identity, is feeling weak? Now, to have lots of brothers around me, particularly people who know my story, is really important, because I can go to them honestly and then say, I'm doubting myself a bit as a man today. And they automatically know to step in and say, what, you're a great guy. We love you and you have all these characteristics, and don't forget this. And I'm like, you're right, I did forget. I forgot. Or I didn't remember them. Or they might turn around and they might embrace me and just hold me for a time. I'm like, oh, I'm one of the guys. Or they'll look me deeply in the eye and they'll enjoy me and I'll feel pleasing to their gaze. Or they'll just be very affirming to me and affirming to my life, and they'll just give me praiseworthy comments and content. And therefore I have their attention, I have their affection, and I have their affirmation upon me, and I'm restored back again to that place in my own true masculine identity. And I'll be honest with you as well, I think it's been very interesting for me, and thank you, Ali, for talking about my work with Harvesters, which was a men's network that I helped to create in the UK and to serve. Just last night, we had my own local men's group meeting, and I think there were 14 of us who met. 1, 2, 3, but 5 of us out of the 14 experienced same-sex attraction. And the other 9 men aren't same-sex attracted at all. So we all gathered together and we have a time of really open and honest sharing. So these guys with same-sex attraction, they will share about their same-sex attraction. They'll say, look, this has been really difficult for me these last 2 weeks, and you all know I'm same-sex attracted, and blah blah blah. And then we talk. What is beautiful is that we live in a day and an age now where it's so normal to hear about gay and lesbian stuff that most people aren't shocked by these words, particularly our peers. They're not shocked by these words. And so rather than still trying to hide from people, I honestly do believe it's really important that we're selective and careful, but that we do come out honestly to the people around us whom we trust, or that we need to learn to trust people. Because these 5 guys who are honest and open about being same-sex attracted, they're speaking to other sex-attracted men, but they're not speaking about same-sex attraction as such. They're speaking about aspects of their struggle in day-to-day life and in their masculinity. Now, I'm sharing this with you deliberately because, let me tell you what's happening. The men with same-sex attraction talk very deeply and very honestly and very vulnerably. And what's beginning to happen is the men who are other sex attracted, they follow the guys who are same sex attracted. They start to be open and deeper and to reflect more and to ask more questions. And they're loving the group and they love coming back, because what happens is the people with same sex attraction and the difficulty of their journey has become a gift to these other men. So in some way, there's a possibility of us having a prophetic nature in some way or other towards other men, or if there's women on board as well, you can be a kind of a prophetic, a very helpful voice, calling others also to become God-centered or to become more God-centered in their journey as well.
Mm.
And many
I mean,
people, I don't think they've ever seen it in that way. They've never seen the positive aspect of what it is to have same-sex attraction, or that there could be a positive aspect to this. And I'm saying to you, absolutely there is.
absolutely.
If it's managed in the right way, it can be very positive.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And what's happening there is they've reached a point where the shame has gone, where they can then, openly be authentic and vulnerable in front of other men. And and that's what I always say. I say we're all men. People just think, oh, this is an OSA guy, I'm an SSA guy, there's difference, but actually there isn't. There's no difference. And men tend to find it difficult to, speak, to be vulnerable, to talk about their feelings. And you're absolutely right. People who are coming forward and saying, look, I have the same sex attraction, I'm dealing with, this is where I am, requires a lot of courage, and that's inspiring for people to saying, wow, if I had that, I wouldn't be able to come in and I wouldn't be able to say that in that. And absolutely. And especially in this climate where it's easier to come out as gay, but it's harder to come out as same-sex attracted, because it's almost like, hang on, like, are you, is this what you truly want? And people start questioning, and it's, and instead of, I mean, if we talk about liberalism should allow both parties. It should allow
That's
people
right.
who identify as gay, same-sex attracted, however, whatever identity you want to put.
Yes.
And also, I think I really liked the fact that you said it was layers. There were layers of things, and this in my story as well. It was like, okay, I've got my first book on same-sex attraction. That's opened one layer. I've read another book or gone somewhere else. Oh, that's opened another layer for me. And I remember reading on your story, I think it was 17 when you came in out as a gay activist.
Man.
And when you had approached therapy, the therapy was only CBT. So it wasn't anything, when people say, oh, this therapy, what is this therapy? It must be something, like half the moon, or, something which is, if you look at the theory, it's talking about well-known therapeutic stuff like attachment theory, shame, EMDR,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, my therapy was just normal stuff. There was no reparative therapy. There was no Joe Nicolosi. There was nobody else. In fact, there was the first book I was ever given and read was a book by a lady called Elizabeth Moberly.
Yes.
And it was called Homosexuality, a New Christian Ethic. And I'd gone into therapy, I'll be honest with you, because I'd come out, because I'd been living as a gay man, because I believed I was born gay, because I'd only ever felt 100% same-sex attracted. And because I hadn't heard about any change, I just assumed that I was born gay. But I'd started therapy, and already what had happened is my therapist was very, very aware that people aren't born gay. But he never said to me, oh, you're not born gay. He just said, let's take a look at some of your issues. And so he began, and as he asked me my story of my life, he began to see, he could see certain different patterns in my life. And he was he was a great man. I was very, very fortunate to be able to have this man, because he was able to challenge me in areas such as pornography and the effects that could have on my life. And he knew I was a gay man, and I say a gay man, practicing and homosexuality and the rest of it. But he began to ask me certain different questions as well. And he was the person who turned around to me. And at one point he said to me, he said, "Do you think you were sexually abused as a child?" And I said, "Me? No, not me." He said, "You seem quite confident." I said, "Well, I'd remember if I had been." He said, "Oh, okay." So he accepted that. A few weeks later, he said to me, Ali, he said, "I asked you a question a few weeks ago and you said no to it." And I said, "Oh yeah, about sexual abuse." He said, "Yeah." He said, "I'm not going to ask you the question again." He said, "I want you in your daily prayer to be open to God himself, speaking into your own soul, into your spirit." He said, "And I want you to ask God whether or not there is any form of sexual abuse in your past, and that he would give you a revelation or a fresh understanding of that." And of course, I was adamant that I hadn't been sexually abused. So I said, "Okay, yeah, I'll do that. I'll do it." And what's happened is at that point, I was praying 3, maybe 4 times a day. And by that point, I think I was learning to be really still in God's presence for about half an hour a day at this stage. So I was learning to really still myself and to recognize that I am but created matter, a creature, and that God is the creator. And I sat there, and then what happened is slowly but surely, out of the bank, if you like, or the filing cabinet of my subconscious and unconscious, slowly but surely, images began to rise. And it took time. It didn't just come straight away. It took time. Anyway, I went back to this man a week or 2 weeks later and said to him, "Why did you ask me about the sexual abuse?" And then he was honest with me. He said, "You bear all the hallmarks or all the warning signs, if you like, of somebody who's been sexually abused." He said, "I'm not saying you have been." I said, "Okay." And I left that with him. And anyway, a few weeks later, I said, "I've been having images coming to mind." He said, "Would you share them with me?" I said, "I will." And as we began to share these images and to unravel them, I began to see in this regular type of therapy, because he was looking cognitively, so what my mind is thinking, how my mind's working, etc. He was looking at me behaviorally, what my behaviors were like and what was going on. And he was putting 2 and 2 together, and he was getting at least 5. In other words, he was seeing beyond the 2 and 2 that I got, And he taught me something really, really important. And we talk about cognitive and behavioral therapy. But I tell you what our spirituality and our faith brings to this journey is he taught me that what happens is when we experience some form of trauma or difficulty in our lives, the way in which we respond to that trauma is clearly and often and understandably it's self-protection. And when we self-protect ourselves, we make a vow. So let me give an example. When I tried to, in some way, reach out to my father for a heart-to-heart relationship of love with him, and it didn't happen several times, the more it didn't happen, I felt further and further away from my father and from masculinity and from the male, and it was painful. So I came to a point I can either sit in my pain and my despair. What I do is I make a vow, I cut myself off from my heart saying, "This is too painful, I can't bear this." So I'll build a barrier. And my barrier is a vow, I will stop looking to this man to find a heart-to-heart connection because it's too painful. Therefore, I build a barrier around my heart to receive the true masculine. And then I live with this vow around me. But the vow around my heart affects my beliefs or my cognitive understanding. So cognitively, I then think, if I can't trust my dad, I can't trust any man. So therefore, the wall around my heart towards men becomes bigger. So when I'm in the company of men, they might reach out to me for friendship, but my behavior is to step away from men and saying, "No, thank you." Because basically, I believe men don't really love me because basically the vow is My father doesn't love me, and I build a wall around my heart. So what happened is my behavioral therapy began to instruct my mind, or began to link in with the cognitive therapy, which showed me that my behavior was as a result of my beliefs. But then my faith took it one step further and showed me my beliefs was as a result of the vows I'd made in my heart. And that therefore I needed to come before him who is almighty and all merciful, and to say, I am sorry, I have got this wrong. Please give me another chance. You are all knowing, you are all powerful, you are all present. Come please and give me another chance. And what happens is, in that place of humility, of recognizing I'm not God, then God can become God. God can release any power he wants to do in my life, and he can begin to restore me, therefore, in those areas of my life. And so what's happening again in our therapy, in the laws, this conversion therapy laws, is that people would not be converted back to their true selves, but they'd be told that what they feel and the tragedy that they live out of with their closed hearts and their inability to trust others, that this is somehow the real persona, but it's not. And that's why we must not be afraid of these laws. Because what happens is, the one thing that cannot be imprisoned is God himself, he who is all eternal. He's the one that gives us our breath. He's the one that gives us our heartbeat. He's the one that's permitting these silly fools who say there is no God. He's keeping them alive and letting them do that. But ultimately, God will have his way. He will just have his way. And our calling isn't to be obedient or true to man and to man's laws, but to be obedient and true to God. So, even if they take away all of our therapists and they say you can't pray with somebody, well, I'll tell you in a minute or two, maybe. I'll let Ali speak a bit perhaps first, but I've got a couple of stories about people where literally God himself is beginning to interact with people and to speak into their lives. So even if the laws and the politicians and the lawmakers and even the therapists stop us from getting our help, there is always hope, because our Creator is all good. He's all powerful. He's all knowing. He's all merciful.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely beautiful what you've shared there, James. And one of the things which I always reflect on is the people who create, like organizations like yourself, you've created it, and you've created these groups, is because it's coming from, you've gone through a difficult place. You had the intervention, the therapeutic intervention, a godly intervention in your life. You experienced the change, and then now when you're seeing the same blessing which was given to you now being taken away from people, that then enrages us. And what's that done internationally is that people who've experienced that transition, and it's the same in in strong support, where when I started, I was like, there's nothing, we only hearing one side of the story, and we're not hearing from the other people, what their experience was and what they're feeling. And actually, with the irony is when they attempt to silence our voice, or they attempt to, say, oh, this is pseudoscience, or this is wackery, or this doesn't exist, that actually encourages people who've, because same-sex attraction isn't something everyone's going to be saying, hey, I have same-sex attraction, I went through it. It's not something that we would be doing in our faith communities. But what it almost has had an effect, that those people who've benefited from the introspection, from going a bit deeper in, from calling out to God and saying, show me what's forgotten, or show me what I can't see, which is inside, show me the pain which is inside, are now standing up and saying no. And the credibility of this is most people who are providing the service are people who've gone through the issue themselves.
That's right.
You don't see that in other Like, I don't know, if I go to a therapist for depression, for example, the therapist or counselor doesn't need to have gone through depression, and that's accepted, isn't it? And so there's, if you want to see the discrimination for this issue, you can see the people who are actually helping are people who've been broken or they've had that themselves, and now they've gone in and they've started helping. Why? Because there is no because the state or because the psychological bodies aren't hearing their voice, and then they've had to say, look, this is our story, and people who want to walk this path can have this option. And I think slowly, with like this international effort, where you've got at least I've seen in the past 5 years or so, more and more kind of organizations coming up and saying, hang on, because I don't remember, I'm studying counseling at the moment, and we're looking into law and counseling, and I can't remember a time where therapy has been banned.
That's right. Yes, I don't know any time when therapy has been banned whatsoever. And it's interesting, and this is where we have to speak up. I mean, I've been very fortunate I think I've probably spoken with about 12 different Australian politicians in the last few weeks. Now, they all see the same. They say, this is ridiculous. Particularly for an adult. Now, I can understand if somebody is a minor, that they're under 18, that, you can't go around forcing things upon people.
Yes.
But as soon as you reach the age of 18, you're saying this is an age of adulthood and people can make their own decisions. Therefore, people should be permitted to be able to go to somebody and say, I want this type of therapy. And particularly if it's proven to be successful. I mean, what's happened is the LGBT lobbyists are pushing things like crazy now, because more and more and more, as science advances, we're beginning to realize actually people aren't born gay. So for example, back in August 2019, some 15, 16 months ago, Science magazine in the United States did research on over 490,000 people, that's nearly 500,000 people, to try and find a gay gene. And there were many of the researchers, there were many people involved in the research project rather, I'm speaking in England now, not Australia, in the research project. And many of the people involved were themselves practicing and open gay, lesbian people, whatever. Of course, the results showed there was no gay gene. There was no gene linked to homosexuality. And although it was very, very shocking, and a number of people tried to stop the results of this research from being presented globally, they felt, no, it's really important that we do this. Now, since those results have come out, there's been a massive push to ban any books that turn around and mention people's stories, like my own. I made a few comments yesterday on Facebook about my own story, and I went back today, they've been removed. My own story was in a book called Achieving Heterosexuality. That book has been banned by Google and by Amazon and everybody else. We know there's a number of titles that have been banned. And so it's more important than ever that we learn to try and find ways that we can speak up and speak our stories. Now, the thing is, I believe what needs to happen is if we recognize there are some layers to our story, then we don't talk about being healed from homosexuality. We talk about the fact that there's things that have happened in our lives that have affected our sexuality and our sexual attraction. So even though I'm very rarely same-sex attracted, I do turn around today and say, well, I experience same-sex attraction sometimes. And I was sexually abused as a child. I was brought into a world of pornography at the age of 8. And I was actually sexually assaulted as a teenager by different gay men. So I bring in all these stories and say, don't I have a right in my pain to find a sense of resolution or healing or recovery from these things? Now, if I speak like that publicly, if there's a broadcaster, a journalist or somebody turns around and says, well, no, you can't recover from that, then they look like the bigot, the hate-filled person who's not equal. Now, for many people, they don't want to tell their story, or they're fearful of telling their story. But I'll say this to you as well, and it's important to know this, particularly as the UK begins to go down this avenue. You don't want these avenues of help and of hope to be closed to you. So if you do need help, and maybe through Ali, and again, I don't know who else is on this call, I don't need to know. But if Ali does know you, then what happens is this, is if ever you want to tell your story and tell it absolutely anonymously, and from a Muslim perspective, or an Islamic perspective, then we can find you journalists who will tell your story and tell it honestly. Because I tell you this, we can find that journalist, but there'll be 10 or 15 journalists that are looking for your Muslim brothers and sisters who are overtly gay, saying, yeah, gay is fine, and you know this already, and they're telling the other side of the story. And it's really, really important that we turn around and say, we're not bigoted. There's not just one side of the story. We believe in pro-choice. If they want to do that, whether we like it or not, they're free to do so. But they can't take our basic human rights away from us and to stop us from being able to make the therapeutic choices that we want to make. And that for 100 years, if not more, are proven to work. You may not know this, but back in the late 1960s, early 1970s, on average, there were over 1,000 articles written in different scientific journals every year, 1,000 articles talking about helping people to move from a homosexual identity into a heterosexual identity, or to moving from same-sex attraction to other sex attraction. That was back in the 1970s. By the 1990s, that number had gone down to about 18 articles globally a year. And then by 2010, I think they said that there were probably 2 articles a year globally that talked about people changing sexual orientation. So much pressure has been put on people to not talk in this way. And yet we know, and you know it from what happened in Birmingham, and let me tell you, I thank God for the Islamic community that stood up against what the primary schools in Birmingham were trying to do, to basically sexualize children and to turn around and to say that homosexuality is equal to heterosexuality. In fact, they're not even trying to say it's equal. The goal is to say that homosexuality is superior to heterosexuality. That is the ultimate goal, and that is what they're pushing for. They know that if they can sexualize children to young age and disturb that sense of purity and innocence during the early stages of children's lives, particularly in childhood and teenage years, then people will be confused and they'll end up either homosexual or questioning their gender, etc. That will then add more numbers to the LGBTQIAAP plus 2S community. Repeat that one if you can.
Yeah, no, you've added a really good point. And just before we go to questions, is I guess you're answering what if there are listeners who want to perhaps share anonymously, or even if there's listeners in maybe Australia, Muslims in Australia, who want to anonymously share this, how can they get in touch, and how can they do that so they can, you know, put their foot forward against against this law, against this movement?
Well, I mean, for a start, it could happen very easily in this way. So if we had, if there's somebody in Australia that wants to do this, clearly they can contact me. They may wish to, I'm trying to think the best way around this. I was going to say, if they don't want their identity to be known whatsoever, I'm trying to think of how they would contact me. Maybe they might need to divulge their identity to me. I'm just thinking if it's through Messenger or something, they might need to divulge their identity to me, or they can get my phone number off you, Ali. But then if they were to talk to a journalist, I would very happily use 2 different telephones, if you like. And I would ensure that the person could speak anonymously through my phone to the journalist. Or what we could do is I could say to the journalist, this person will call you and they will withhold their number in 5 minutes time. So you can ask them any questions, ask them different things, but they will not divulge their number and they will not divulge their name. And therefore the person can tell their story legitimately and they know that they cannot be traced. But they can tell their story. Their story can then be written about in the newspaper or online or whatever it is. And clearly they'll change the name, they'll give some form of different name, because of course the journalists won't know their name anyway. But that gives an opportunity for their story to be told. Or of course, if they wish me in some way or other to use their story, and I do write a number of different articles, then I'm very happy to listen to their story and to write up their own story and to let them see it before anything goes to print, so that they're very, very aware that their anonymity is constantly being honoured. But it gives an opportunity for them to be a voice into the midst of society as a whole, but also to be able to speak words of truth to the Islamic community. And in some cases, that means that if there's a message that you want the imams to know, we can get that message to the imams about what's happening in same-sex attraction. But then we can also get a message out to politicians and others to say, you know, don't think just because somebody experienced same-sex attraction that they believe in or adhere to the same mindset and ideology that the LGBT community has. Hopefully I've answered that question correctly for you.
Yeah, and I'd like to, kind of further that. If there's people who wish to contact, you can contact myself, you can contact James, and I think it's time for people to kind of who can to step forward and kind of say who've experienced help through either counselling, therapy, a support group, to come forward and say, no, this is something which is very beneficial, and time for them to come forward so that the same or better service is then available for people going forward. So yeah, no, thank you.
No, and I'll say this to you. I mean, and I ask you, and you might have a separate discussion about this. Ali, I'd mentioned to you before, and maybe to a couple of the other guys on this on this webinar tonight. For quite some time, when I lived and worked in London, I would regularly meet with members of the Muslim Council of Great Britain, and I have no hesitation whatsoever of being able to present your anonymous stories to the council, for them to actually wake up and to begin to take this topic and to take your lives very seriously as well. And in some way or other, to be able to take a collective of Muslim stories from around the world and to be able to say, there is a different story here, there's a different side, and people need to wake up to this and to start having respect and sensitivity and compassion to Muslims who experience same-sex attraction. And to speak on your behalf, really, and to be an advocate for you and for your human rights, for your rights to be able to choose the therapeutic journey, and for you to not to have to live in fear within your own communities. And of course, I will turn around publicly and say these are some of the greatest men I know, because they are actually facing some of the most difficult aspects of their lives with incredible courage and valor. So I'm very happy to be an advocate for you on this.
That'd be absolutely great. Yeah, no, we have contacted MCB, and we hope that they're going through elections at the moment, and we're hoping after that period they are able to support, and faith organizations can come together and basically fight for, like you say, a human right of access to therapy. And like we discussed before, therapy is something which should be available to everyone, regardless of whatever background they're coming from, and just kind of having that at the forefront for especially Muslim communities, where it's perhaps difficult sometimes to discuss these issues, but perhaps sometimes these bans come in as a bliss, because it kind of forces organizations which wouldn't normally, respond, because if at this time they're inactive, then that's going to cause further harm. And I mean, what they don't actually realize, if people don't get help, then there's actually potential of self-harm and suicide in cases where people are saying, and we've heard so many of that, where people are actually harmed by going to a gay affirmative therapist because that's
right.
not what they want, and they feel like they're being misunderstood and their ideology isn't understood by their religious circle, or understood by the liberalism, and they're kind of stuck in between, where they're saying there's that feeling of no one understands what I'm actually experiencing. Yep. So we've just gone over an hour, so I'm going to take 4 questions, if that's okay. So the way we're going to do the questions is, you can raise your hand, and if you raise your hand, you'll be able to ask a question. So at the bottom of your screen, if you're on a mobile or so, there'll be hand option. But please note, if you do that, then your identity kind of comes in. If you want to stay anonymous, then there's the Q&A option, which is at the bottom, and you can vote for and as well as participate in that. So I'm going to kind of look at some of the questions which are there. So the first one is saying, Salam alaikum, thank you so much for James for sharing your journey, both personal and political. I have a few questions, but I don't have time to ask all of them. But you said twice today that the goal of governments or LGBT lobbyists is to promote homosexuality as superior to heterosexuality. That's a very intriguing statement. What have you observed in our current socio-political climate which has made you come to that conclusion?
Well, let me say this first of all. I was part and parcel of a strategy meeting in London back in 1987. Yes, I'm that old. And it happened in Farringdon, in something that was called the London Lesbian and Gay Centre. It doesn't exist anymore. It was financed by the Labour government at the time. And there was a meeting of Americans and British gays, if you like. And what we discussed was how we would normalize homosexuality. And the 2 Americans both said that we needed to infiltrate and take leadership in the media. Well, that's happened. In entertainment, that's definitely happened. In education, which is the big push. In religion, which is now beginning to happen seriously. In healthcare, well, that's happened certainly in psychiatry and psychology. In the military, there's a big push for gays and all this different thing, and transgender people now in the military. In politics is riddled now with LGBT lobbyists. They said, and also in sport. And I remember one of the Americans saying to me, of course, sport will be the most difficult. And one of the British guys said, why will sport be difficult? And he said, well, to play sport, you have to have a body. And the body screams male and female. And we have to get rid of male and female. And the other guy said, it's not about even homonormativity. It's about homo superiority. They knew perfectly well that if you disturb the healthy development of a child's life, they will end up same-sex attracted, or they will end up questioning their gender. And that's the very reason why I think it's called RSE, Religious and Sex Education or something or other, whatever it is in the UK. It's called Safe Schools here in Australia. And it's not about being safe, it was about a same-sex attracted, friendly environment that they were trying to create in schools. So they were trying to normalize homosexuality. But we know that if you try and tell little children in primary school where boys should naturally gravitate to boys and become friends, and where girls should naturally gravitate to girls and become friends, that if you tell them in primary school, oh, you're a boy that likes boys, you're gay, or to girls that like girls, you're a lesbian. And what happens is you keep pushing this message to them all the time. And then when they enter puberty, and it's natural for a young boy in puberty to look up to the older boys and think they're attractive because he's wondering what he will be like. But if he's been labeled with gay, then what happens when he begins to think them sexually attractive, somebody will say at 12, 13, well, you're gay, you should try that. So what they're trying to do is literally to make the majority homosexual and use the argument, well, we've got IVF, we can make babies and blah, 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 we can do all this. There's nothing to worry about. People just need to be true to themselves. But let's be honest, where does homosexuality come from? With people of faith. It doesn't come from God. It doesn't. It is not his design. Therefore, it has to come from that which is the powers of darkness and evil. And so what happens is, calling powers of darkness and evil the devil hates male and female. He hates marriage and the fact that a man and a woman can come together and can create with God an eternal soul. Hates it. So what he wants to do is to totally and utterly destroy male and female, to destroy marriage, to destroy the dignity of our sexual, the gift of our sexual attraction and everything to do with it. And so what happens is there's been a slow growing of homosexuality where for a number of decades, it's been about 3 or 4% of people. We know this sense that 3 or 4% of people have been homosexual. But now what's happening, that number is significantly beginning to rise among our young people because the media and entertainment overall, and now education, is all saying to them, this is fine, this is normal, and you're a hero if you come out as gay. And we've all got to wave a rainbow flag and have Colour Purple Day and the unicorn and all these crazy other stuff that they've got out there. So the push is for homo superiority, because let's be honest, we know it's crippling to be in that 3% of same-sex attracted people. And it feels like the other 97% is somehow better than us. And so what they want is to reverse that, and they want to feel the best, because only then will they feel happy. So homo superiority, although it's a very strong phrase and it's a very threatening phrase, that I can assure you is the ultimate goal.
Thank you. Let's see, next question. Another question, I think it's by the same attendee. I have is that you say conversion therapies are harmful, or that therapies you undertake in particular are harmful. My impression is that the restrictive laws implemented on the basis of this understanding, how would you respond to those claims? So yes, this is the, all therapies are harmful, which do this work.
Well, I tell you how I would discredit those claims. First of all, you need to go back and say, where is the research that you have done? Here in Australia, the research that's been done has come out of a university called La Trobe University. Don't worry about the name. But this is the same university that brought about a perverted sex education for our children over here. It's been recognized as a perverted sex education. So the same university has brought out this research. The research is based on the life stories of 15 people who all say they've been harmed by therapy and prayer. They give no names. I understand them. They give no dates. So this could have been 40 years ago. And they don't even go into detail of what each person's story really is. So we're saying to them, if you haven't got this knowledge, how do we know that this information is true? And what's it based on? Of course, when you do a research project, and particularly when it comes to human beings and your citizens, you say, well, how has this topic affected people from both sides? Has it affected them harmfully? But has this also, for some people, had a positive effect? And this is the reason why we established a group called freetochange.org.au here in Australia, is we wanted to tell our stories of the fact that our anxieties decreased. We wanted to be able to tell the stories about the fact that our addictions decreased, that our sexual compulsivity decreased, that our self-harm decreased, that our fear of our own kind, of our own sex, and of the opposite sex, it decreased, that our inability to commit decreased, our self-hatred or our blame of others decreased, that our depressions decreased and the rest of it. But also there was an increase in being able to be affirming of ourselves and of other people, that we learned to be able to reach out to other people and help them. So we have deliberately turned around and done the research that they have not done, and we've shoved it in their faces. So that's how we're responding to the claims that the therapies are harmful, or that the therapies that I underwent are harmful. I then just tell my story and say, hang on a minute. I was, I practiced homosexually. I had syphilis. I got gonorrhea. I got hepatitis. I got HPV. I was at risk of becoming HIV positive. And now I haven't got any of those things. I'm no longer a burden on the health service because I don't need to visit the sexual health clinic. I have confidence. I have no self-harm. I've got no suicidal ideation. I'm no longer, I've got all these addictions and compulsions. I was able to get married, pay my taxes, to secure a job. My life's never been better. What is so harmful about that? So rather than talking about the therapies, which is what they want to talk about, we talk about the result of the therapies. They want to talk about therapy, therapy, therapy. And we're saying, no, therapy is about results. Stop talking about what happens in therapy. Look at what the fruit of the therapy is. But they want to make so much noise about therapy, therapy. They don't want us to talk about the fruits, which is why they're trying to ban our stories and ban everything else. It's because they know, and they do know, the fruit is real in our lives. I hope that's a hope.
No, that's very well answered. So we have another question. Assalamu alaikum. As you mentioned politics, I felt that left political parties in US and Europe support LGBT and welcome Muslims, whereas those who support therapy are in the right-wing party and do not welcome Muslims. So Muslims feeling stuck. How can we solve this dilemma and come to better politics regarding Muslims with SSA? So yeah, so there is, I think he's probably referring to the US administration, which got changed, in this week. And, but perhaps in Europe as well, some parts of Europe where, especially for the Muslim community, where we're feeling, people would be more right-winged who would support the therapy, but Muslims find themselves in an odd circumstance where the left would support them, but the left won't support the therapy. So if you've got Muslim wanting therapy, it's confusing both parties because it's kind of a different ground.
Listen, let me say this to you, and this is going to be a challenge to you as Muslim men. But I want to talk to you about what it's like to be looking in on you, because clearly I'm on the outside of your situation. There's a sense in which the right wing, and by right wing I mean those who are pro-family, pro-marriage, who are pro-faith, pro-God, if you like, they've been quite asleep. And what's happened is that the left wing have turned around and been quick in some way or other to engage the Muslim community and to welcome the Muslim community. I'm pleased that they've done that. I really am. But overall, what's happened is, and this is what's been happening in Victoria, here in Australia, there's been lots of money pushed into the Muslim community. So they think, great, these politicians are on our side. But the politicians are now making laws that are going to actually begin to get rid of the Quran. They will get rid of your holy book. They'll get rid of anything you stand for because it stands in the way of what they believe. But what they want to do is to give you a sense of belonging and a sense of power. But really deep down, they're not interested in your belonging. They're interested in being able to have power over you. Now, years ago, the left wing was always about what we might call the underdog or the immigrant or the new people coming into a country. So particularly Muslims moving into Europe, whatever it might be, many of whom, not all, but most of whom have been immigrants. They've left the country of origin and moved into Europe and moved to the USA. But this is where the challenge comes now, is that actually the Muslim community is not looked upon, for the most part, as something foreign. I think many in the Muslim community believe that people do look at them like that, but actually they don't. And I really mean it, they don't, not at all. In fact, what happens is our values, the values of the right wing in the US and in Europe that the Muslim community upholds are the same. It's just that what's happened is the Muslim community in some way has aligned itself with the left. And therefore, the right wing thinks it doesn't stand for their values. But actually, your values are the same. They're exactly the same. So what happens is there needs to become more of a dialogue, a greater dialogue between the right, those who are right wing, and probably more the center right in particular, to show that actually, you do have the same principles, the same values, the same virtuous desires as these right-wing people have. Again, it's another way in which I believe that the devil, we can use this vocabulary, has tried to set apart different people of faith. He loves division. He hates unity. I mean, I have so much more in common with you guys than I do actually with many people in Christian churches. We're on the same page as each other. We support each other with the same values, the things we stand for are very, very similar. And therefore, if we weren't having the dialogue and speaking with each other, we wouldn't know these things. So I want to say to you, I want to encourage you, to really encourage you, that when people are right-wing, when you show your true colors to them, they will actually befriend you much more and take you onto their side. And I've got to say this to you, if you don't do this, then what happens is the loony left, which is gaining more and more power because it's affected schools and affected all the universities. Anybody 25, age 30 or below is now believes the loony left stuff. They're all crazy. They believe all identity politics, and they believe ideology means more than science and the proven things of our faith. They reject God. They're crazy. So in some way or other, we've got to be able to turn around and say to people, what are your values and virtues? And if you share the same values and virtues, we have to stick together. And as my Muslim brothers, you share my same values and virtues. That's why I'm very, very happy to be talking to you tonight. And I'll talk to you again if you ever want me to.
Well, we're very happy to have you, James. And, that was I would say that would have been a difficult question because obviously, but I know you're very open-minded, and we're talking about, let's look at the similarities in our faiths and in our beliefs, and especially when we talk about all the Abrahamic religions in terms of there's so much which is kind of united, and there's so much which is unity, and there's so many places in the Middle East where all of those three factions have been living peacefully, they're coexisting together. And obviously, you have this concept of divide and conquer. So the media will play one faith community against the other.
Very deliberately so. And look, say some people may not know, I spent 6 years working with the British media, with the BBC and with ITV and Sky and all these other outlets, and all the different newspapers there, the Times, the Telegraph, the Mail, the Express, the Guardian, the Independent. And regularly, a journalist would call me when I was working in the Cardinal's office, the head of the Catholic Church, if you like, in the UK. They would call me as working in the media office, and they'd ask a question. And then what I would do is I would call the chief rabbi's office, or I would call the chief mufti's office, whatever it is, and I'd say, have you had this journalist call you with the same question? They said, yes, we have.
Mm.
And we discuss it together, and we realized that they were deliberately trying to set up division between us. And so together, what we would do, we would work together to try and respond in such a way that, our faith and our belief in one God would be able to come forth. And often we would then thwart the attempts by the journalists to create division between us. And that's why I'm saying is, as people of faith, more than ever today, yes, we have differences. We all have differences. Look, I know the many, many differences in the Muslim world. But let's be honest, even this topic of same-sex attraction, because this is so difficult and challenging and painful to our soul and our soul journey, this is what unifies us. And we have a deep love and a deep compassion and a deep sensitivity and respect for each other, because we all know the pain and difficulty of this journey. And let's hope that sense of unity keeps growing as well.
No, I think you mentioned this earlier, thinking of SSA as a blessing, which has come in, and oddly our shared pain has come in as a blessing, which allows us to unite on this in such level. I think we can take a few more questions. So there's another question, I guess. To what extent have Australian regional governments engaged with people with same-sex attraction to understand their ideas related to prayer and therapy? I can already know what the answer for that is. For example, those brothers who you worked with, and I know, just to answer that from a UK perspective, the UK government, before its ban, there was in the UK, we had this person who created a petition which had over 250,000 signatures on the parliament. And when the answer came from the government was actually quite nuanced in that they said that they need to consider things. Most of this stuff was already covered under existing law in terms of criminal activity. But what the government then did was, okay, we need to do a survey for people who have accessed this therapy and see their experiences from it. And that survey, which I think it was, I can't remember which governmental office it was, it immediately got shut down because all the LGBT lobby said, what you want people to survey about their trauma, about, so they completely annihilated that survey, which had
That's right, and that's what they need to do.
Because obviously, if that channel had opened and that channel had allowed people to share their stories from a different ideological point of view, then that would have challenged. And we saw this in Canada, where I think it was Calgary, I can't remember which state it was, where they received a good amount of papers from people who had benefited from the counselling and the therapeutic intervention. And as a response, then the LGBT kind of said, and the weird thing is, the people who are writing against it haven't taken the therapy themselves. So it's what, if you're going to be talking about an issue, you have to have some experience in it, For example, I don't know, if I'm Muslim and we're talking about RSC, well, just because I'm a Muslim, I don't know what RSC is because I'm not at the age where I'm studying RSC. I've left school, so my value doesn't hold as a child who is going through RSC. Yet somehow the LGBT of people who have not experienced the particular type of therapy that we're talking about. Yes, they may have experienced difficulties, but we're talking about a talking therapy. We're talking about existing licensed counselors and psychotherapists, or existing features. So we're not talking about something which is out of the box.
No, we're talking about normal therapy that most people in society at some point or other deal with. And this is the reason, Ali, why they're being very, very specific about therapy. They're not talking about reparative therapy. They're not talking about, experiential weekends. I mean, they are talking about these things, but they're trying to do a ban across the board, because they know that if people start examining beneath the surface and thinking a little bit more deeply and getting in touch with things from the past, as we do in CBT and EMDR and different therapy, talk therapy and all these things, then what actually happens is people start recognizing, oh my goodness, what I experienced as a teenager was sexual abuse. That should not have happened to me. Or I actually realize now that I'm at war with other men. I hadn't realized it. Or I have a hatred towards women. Or I've detached from the people I need to be attached to. So overall, what's happening is they want to do a one swipe ban towards all these different therapies. And this is to our advantage, because of course, two things is, first of all, this means it locks down the whole therapeutic community from discussing anything to do with sexuality, which would be catastrophic across the board. But the second thing is even if you wanted somebody to move from homosexuality to heterosexuality, which you can't promise, and you can't guarantee it anyway. I don't think you should promise it or guarantee it.
Yeah.
I think what happens is people look for a sense of integrity and authenticity in where they are. And, the first part of my journey was to accept that I was same-sex attracted, not to pretend I wasn't, not to be at war with myself, but to be at peace with the fact this is my reality. If I'm not at peace with where I am, I can't be led to a different place. So what happens is people will continue to have regular therapy and may never talk about homosexuality, but if they deal with their issues, their homosexuality or same-sex attraction is likely, although we can't guarantee it, it is likely to decrease. It just is. And that's why we're not to be overtly afraid in all of this. What will happen is, I'm hoping that some of the therapists will turn around and react to this. Of course, the challenge will become this, and this is where transgenderism is quite a gift to us, although it's something horrendous. You may very well, and this is what's happening here in Australia, so if a woman walks into a therapist's office and says, I'm wanting to move to become a man because I really think I'm a man, then the therapist has to go, oh, yes, oh, affirm, wonderful, wonderful. But you see, what happens if this woman walks into a therapist's office and says, I really think I should be a man. And the therapist goes, yes, let's affirm you as a man. But the therapist doesn't know that this woman is actually a trans female and is detransitioning back to manhood. In other words, these laws are wrought with problems and wrought difficulties. So to turn around and legislate, to deliberately say what you can and you cannot do in the therapeutic situation is almost impossible. And so these laws will literally cause all sorts of difficulties, and very soon. But what will also happen is, because people have created these laws, what will happen is you may end up with somebody who transitions to become the opposite gender and then turns around and sues the government who made these laws that they can't have therapy, because the person realizes, well, you said I could become a woman and my chromosomes are still XY. Why aren't you going to change me to become totally a woman? Actually, you made a promise that I could be this, but I can't be this. Therefore, you lied to me. And therefore, I've got every right now to sue the government for several $1 million. And we're talking to different people who are detransitioning here in Australia to try and do that. because only then will the laws begin to change. And the government needs to wake up and to back off from trying to change or to take away our choice for our own autonomous therapeutic journey.
Yeah, well answered. Yeah, definitely. So we've got one last question. It says, thank you for sharing. I missed the initial part of the session. Do you still experience SSA? Are there times when you still struggle? When do you happen? When this happens, if it does? And just to add on that, I think it's, and even with strong support, what we don't say is complete change, SSA disappears, it doesn't go away, because I actually know some organizations have done that and they've misled people, because that's not what the actual truth is. If I've lived, for a lot of us, if we've lived a certain way and a certain way of thinking, nothing, and you can take that for anything. If I think a certain way for years and years and years, especially during childhood when, my brain's developing.
Exactly.
Yeah, you can't just eliminate that, but what we do say is that most people reach a comfort level, or as James has said today, he's actually grateful for the SSA. So we've turned it on its head, because it's almost like, hang on, when I started this work, I was saying, no, I want to get, I want to get rid of it. I don't want anything to do with it. I want to go away. But the more we've looked, the more we've realized, actually, if I didn't have the SSA, I wouldn't also have so many of these other blessings which God has given me.
That's right.
And I wouldn't have that power of introspection, because all that community wants you to do is say, don't think too deep. Don't, it's just act on a certain way. So that's why what we say is the aim is not necessarily heterosexuality doesn't mean you've reached God-centricity. If a magic wand was to, given, and now suddenly my same-sex attraction is opposite sex attraction, guess what? I still have the problems of intimacy. I still have the problems of feeling less than. I still have the problems of feeling shame. I still have the problems of detachment. So, even if the attraction changes 100%, I still have the underlying issues, or if it's sexual addiction, then I'm doing it with the other sex. So, it's, I just wanted to kind of add that, because that's often something, when you're early in the journey, you're saying, hang on, so you still have same-sex attraction? What does this mean?
Well, let me say this is, and clearly I'll answer the question very honestly. I did mention a bit earlier on, but first of all, do I still experience same-sex attraction? Yes, on occasions I do. Do I still struggle with it? The word struggle, yes, but it's nothing like the struggle I used to have, because I now know what to do with it when it happens. And what I mentioned earlier on is this: when a man finds another man deeply sexually attractive, and I'm talking sexually attractive, and it becomes a part of his fantasy, then what he's doing, he's actually making a god of this other man, or he's saying, you're better than me. And what we want to do is to say, I'm as good as you, which is where the word gay comes from. It's actually an acronym for as good as you. So we're believing we're not as good as that other man. And I've learned to do several things. First of all, if I'm able to approach that man and to speak to him and have a conversation, it's often what I do. I may go up to him and talk with him. So I regularly go to the gym. And sometimes I see a guy in the gym and I think, whoa, what a handsome man, what a great man. Normally I would just turn around and just say, God bless you.
you know, that's fantastic. I'll do my workout, you do yours. But sometimes if I'm really drawn towards him, then what happens, I might go up to him and I might begin a conversation with him. And it's very interesting because in my mind, he's better than me. But if I start to speak to him, he might not be able to look me in the eyes, or he might stutter a little bit, or he's a bit uncomfortable. I'm thinking, oh, he's not very comfortable in his skin. He looks great, and I've decided he's better than me, but actually he's not. He's actually quite equal to me. That's one way I deal with it. The second way is this: is if I have seen an image somewhere of a man, or I sit and think, oh, maybe I should be more muscular, or I should be more this, whatever it is, then or what happens is I just feel I'm not connecting with the world of men. I have been able to form around me a men's group, and I've got several men who know my story and know my story intimately. Some of these men are same-sex attracted. Some of these men are other sex attracted. So I can go to them and say, I'm doubting myself as a man. So if I'm experiencing same-sex attraction, I'm questioning myself as a man. And when I talk to these other brothers of mine, and I say, look, I'm questioning myself as a man, then they know to give me their attention, to give me their affection, and to give me their affirmation of who I am. And what happens is I also bring that before God and say to God, you know, I have dared to compare myself with somebody else, as though somehow you have created me wrong. I believe every person is God's work of art, because we're so unique. Every iris is unique, every fingerprint is unique, everything. We are beautifully and wonderfully and fearfully made, each one of us. And so I also have to come back often to a place of repentance and to recognize before God, you have made me to be me, and that is the best person that I can be. So that's a few things what I do with this. And this is my last point on this, and this is an electric point, it's really important. I hope I will always experience same-sex attraction. Not deeply erotically, but I hope I never stop being able to look at my brothers and go, wow, what a handsome man. Wow, what a talented man. Wow, what a holy man. What a gifted man. I'm drawn towards this man. I really like him. He's great company, whatever it might be. And let me say this to you, because I've walked with so many men with other sex attraction, and I know them intimately as well. Many men with other sex attraction find other men attractive, and even can turn around and say, wow, that guy is a very sexy man. They think there's a sexual energy from him, the sexual whatever. These men don't want to have sex with that man, but they recognize there is something beautiful about him emotionally, intellectually, sexually, spiritually, physically, whatever it might be. In other words, if we're not careful, we set ourselves a benchmark that we will never be same-sex attracted, and we always fail, and therefore we feel despair. I'm saying get rid of that benchmark. Learn to move what is an erotic attraction towards other men to being a healthy, appropriate attraction, a God-given attraction towards other men. Because if you can see the goodness and the beauty of them, you can go up to them and you can absolutely affirm them. And they will learn to affirm you. And then as iron sharpens iron, one man begins to sharpen another man. And we begin to bestow the masculine upon each other. Masculinity is something we share with each other, if we're willing to do that, and particularly before God. So I hope that's a helpful answer.
That's a really good, a really good summary in the 3 points that you've shared. First, the reframing of the SSA. When we think, the example of the gym, when you go in and you think, oh my God, this is such a hot guy. And the moment he opens his mouth and it's like, oh, this accent's rubbish. Or
he just is not articulate. He goes, he grunts at you and you think, oh, and then if he's really intellectual and he's really got it together, he might be really pleased that you've made contact with him.
Exactly, because most people want the same. They want the connection. They want someone to come and speak to them. And I've experienced that myself, going to the gym, and people actually just want to have that conversation. So yeah. And then the second point of having that support group, that support structure where you can be vulnerable enough to say, look, I'm going through this, and actually what I need is some brotherly affirmation that I'm not crazy and I'm not alone in this, and that, you know, that builds up your self-esteem. And the third point is absolutely great, and this is why we've used the term same-sex lust being problematic, but same-sex attraction not necessarily being problematic at all, because you could argue every man has same-sex attraction, in the sense that, you know, I mean, if you follow in the UK how the footballers are treated, you know, by yeah,
Exactly. It's, I mean, and you know, and this is it. What happened is, this is the reason why there are gay men in sport, and particularly in team sport, is because they've often grown up brushing alongside each other, learning to be intimate with each other, and learning to trust each other. They understand nakedness with each other. They know it's to travel and to be away with each other. And so what happens is that their masculine tank, as I call it, their masculine inside, the inside in this masculine is pretty full, or full enough. And they're not frightened of what it is to be able to be intimate with each other. And that's the ultimate goal for us, is not that we keep running away, but that we would step out of our fear and out of our shame. We'd bring down the walls of these vows that we made, and we'd allow our belief system to change, and to realize that actually we're men with aspects of us who are broken like every other man. Just that our aspects look different to other people's. And that if we're really honest, if we are God-centered, then what happens, I do believe that the Almighty One will help us in the midst of all this. I really do. And that's my experience with many, many people.
What a beautiful way to end, in God-centricity over self-centricity. So, you know, and we've covered so much on this webinar, you know, kind of so many pertinent issues in the legislation, whether it be in the UK or whether in Australia, which and, you know, the ridiculous fines which we've never seen before in history, being put in the on the therapy. And I do encourage the viewers to engage with us. You can engage with James or myself, and coming forward and maybe presenting stories which would then help bolster the case and bolster the movement for people to continue having access to the support and therapy that's a human right and needs to be available for everyone. I thank the attendees for the questions, and hopefully, you know, it's 2021, in at least in a lot of places it's lockdown here, but we're grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that at least through this webinar platform where we're able to connect, we're able to see our brothers in different locations. And I just want to bless everyone which is here for joining and participating. So thanks again, James, and we'll definitely be in touch soon. So thanks
Thank you
everyone.
very much. Thank you. Blessings on all of you.
Thanks. Bye.
Goodbye. Bye-bye.